The mud was a cold, greedy thing, sucking at the hem of her thin dress. Elara stood with her chin held high, a posture that defied the jeers and the biting wind that swept down from the northern peaks. Before her lay the Shadowlands, a territory marked by jagged, skeletal trees and an oppressive silence that was said to swallow sound. Behind her, everything she had ever known was a wall of contempt. Her sister, Lyra, stood at the forefront, her face a mask of triumphant cruelty. A fitting end for a worthless Omega, Lyra's voice was sharp, cutting through the murmurs of their pack. You brought shame upon us with your weakness. Let the Shadow King have you. His pack will make quick sport of you. Elara did not flinch. She did not look at her father, the Alpha who had pronounced this sentence, his gaze fixed on some distant point, refusing to meet hers. Weakness. They called her weak because she did not possess the overt aggression, the snarling ambition that defined their people. They mistook her quiet resilience for fragility, her empathy for a fatal flaw. They were wrong. She had a strength they could not comprehend, a core of steel forged in the fires of their constant scorn. She gave them nothing, not a tear, not a plea. She simply turned her back on them, on the only home she had ever known, and faced the deadened line of trees that marked the border. Each step was a deliberate act of severing. The mud clung to her ankles, a final, desperate grasp from a life she was leaving behind. She felt their eyes on her back, waiting for her to stumble, to scream. She did neither. She walked toward what they believed was her death, but for the first time she felt the whisper of freedom. They left her at the border to die. They did not know someone was already walking toward her. King Theron stood at the highest window of the Frostfang citadel, a fortress of black stone and enchanted ice that pierced the perpetually grey sky. Below him, his kingdom stretched out, a land of stark beauty and disciplined silence. He ruled it not with warmth, but with an unyielding, chilling authority that had kept it safe for 300 years. He felt nothing for it. He felt nothing for his people, his warriors, or the crown upon his head. He felt nothing at all. It was his curse, the frost soul. A malediction laid upon his bloodline centuries ago. It began as a whisper of cold in the veins, a dulling of the soul's fire. Over the long years it had consumed him. His emotions were glaciers, locked and frozen. Joy, grief, anger, love, they were all foreign words for a language he no longer spoke. The only sensation that ever broke through the numbness was a deep, gnawing cold, a physical manifestation of the ice that was slowly, inevitably, encasing his heart. He flexed his gauntleted hand. Beneath the black, articulated steel, his skin was no longer skin. It was a network of crystalline frost, beautiful and terrifying, that had already claimed him to the elbow. He kept it hidden. He kept everything hidden. To his people, he was the Shadow King, an immortal, unreadable sovereign, a figure of fear and respect. They did not see the prisoner inside the king, the man slowly turning to ice. Then he felt it, a flicker, a strange, impossible sensation on the edge of his frozen consciousness. It was not warmth, not exactly. It was more like a resonance, a single, clear note in a world of absolute silence. It pulled at him, a physical tug originating from the southern border. He had not felt a pull toward anything in a century. Curiosity was an emotion, and he did not have them. Yet his feet moved of their own accord, taking him from the lonely spire and down through the silent, echoing halls of his home. Elara stopped just inside the tree line. The air here was different. Still, heavy, the jeers of her pack had faded, replaced by a silence so profound It felt like a presence. She was not afraid. The fear had been burned out of her long ago. She sank to the ground, leaning her back against the rough bark of a petrified tree, and closed her eyes. If this was to be her end, she would meet it with the same dignity she had lived her life. She would not be prey, cowering in the dark. She would be a still, defiant point of light against the encroaching shadow. She did not know how long she sat there, adrift in the quiet. But then a new sound reached her, the soft crunch of boots on frozen earth. Her eyes snapped open. A figure was emerging from the deeper gloom of the forest, moving with a predator's grace that was utterly silent and yet commanded the entire landscape. He was tall, impossibly so, clad in armour the colour of a midnight sky, a heavy cloak of black wolf fur trailing behind him. As he drew closer, she saw his face. It was a sculpture of hard lines and severe beauty, framed by hair as black as a raven's wing. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the colour of a winter storm, and they held an emptiness so vast and ancient it made the desolate forest seem vibrant. He was the Shadow King, Alpha of Alphas, the monster they had sent her to, yet as he stopped a few feet from her, she felt no terror, she felt seen. Theron stared at the woman before him. She was small, dressed in rags, smudged with mud, yet she met his gaze without a tremor. Every other creature, wolf or man, flinched from his presence. They saw the power, the deathless cold that clung to him like a shroud. This girl did not. She looked at him as if he were merely a man, and in her eyes he saw not fear, but an unnerving, quiet strength. The strange resonance he had felt intensified, a low hum that seemed to originate from her very being. For the first time in 100 years, a crack appeared in his glacial composure. "They cast you out," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together in a frozen riverbed. It was not a question. "They did," Alara replied, her voice clear and steady. He took another step closer, his shadow falling over her. He expected her to cower, to beg. It was the way of things. The strong culled the weak. But she remained seated, her spine straight, her gaze unwavering. It was this stillness, this absolute refusal to be cowed, that struck him more than any display of power ever could. In a world that had tried to erase her, she was utterly, defiantly present. Behind him, his elite guard materialized from the shadows, their silver eyes glowing. They had followed their king, confused by his sudden, silent departure from the citadel. They saw the Omega Girl, the offering left at their border, and waited for the command to end her. Theron felt their expectation. He should have given the order. He should have turned and walked away, leaving her to the unforgiving forest. But the resonance, it was a thread, and he found himself unwilling to let it go. He looked down at her, this small discarded thing, and a thought, alien and startling, broke the surface of his frozen mind. Mine, he extended a hand, the black steel of his gauntlet seeming to absorb the faint light. It was not a command, it was a request, an offering. Alara looked at the hand, then back to his face. She saw no malice in his storm-grey eyes, only a profound, aching emptiness, a loneliness that mirrored her own. Slowly, she placed her small, cold hand into his. The moment their skin, or rather her skin and his armour, made contact, the resonance flared. Theron felt it like a physical blow, a ghost of warmth that pierced through the layers of ice around his soul. It was gone as quickly as it came, but the echo of it remained, a single point of heat in an eternity of cold. He closed his fingers around hers, his grip surprisingly gentle, and pulled her to her feet. He turned to his warriors, his expression as unreadable as ever, but his voice held a finality that brooked no argument. "She is with me." And with that, he led her away from the border, away from the life that had cast her out, and deeper into the heart of his silent, shadowed kingdom. The Frostfang citadel loomed in the distance, a crown of black spires against the bruised twilight sky. For Alara, it was not an executioner's block, but a strange and uncertain sanctuary. For Theron, it was the first time in centuries he had not walked its halls entirely alone. The citadel was as cold as its king. The great hall was a cavern of polished obsidian and dark, heavy tapestries that depicted ancient, brutal victories. The air was thin and frigid, carrying no scent of wood smoke or food, only the clean, sterile smell of stone and ice. Alara walked beside Theron, her small hand still loosely held in his gauntlet. His warriors followed at a distance, their silent shock a palpable thing. Their king had never brought anyone into the citadel's inner sanctum, certainly not a stray Omega. Theron led her to a suite of rooms high in the western spire. They were vast and opulent, furnished with dark woods and rich velvets, but they were utterly unused. A fine layer of dust coated every surface. A massive hearth stood cold and black. He released her hand, the absence of his touch leaving a strange chill on her skin. "This will be yours," he stated, his gaze sweeping the room as if noticing its emptiness for the first time. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Alara said, her voice soft but not subservient. She looked around the cold, beautiful prison. It was a far cry from the cramped corner of the den she had been allotted in her old pack, but it felt just as lonely. He watched her, his head tilted slightly. He was trying to understand her. He had brought her here on an impulse he could not name, and now he was faced with the reality of her presence. She was a disruption, a variable in an equation that had been unchanged for centuries. He felt a flicker of something. Irritation? No, that was too warm a word. It was a disquiet in the frozen stillness of his mind. "You are not afraid," he observed again. "Should I be?" she asked, turning to face him directly. "You saved me from dying at the border. Is my death simply to be postponed?" The directness of her question was a surprise. No one spoke to him this way. They used titles and platitudes, their words wrapped in layers of fear and reverence. She offered him only blunt, unadorned honesty. "If I wanted you dead," he said, his voice flat, "you would be." "Then I have no reason to be afraid," she concluded simply. She walked past him to the large, arched window, looking out at the jagged peaks that surrounded the citadel. "It is beautiful here, in a severe sort of way." He found himself standing beside her, following her gaze. He had looked out of this window 1,000 times and seen only rock and ice. Through her eyes, for a fleeting second, he saw the stark majesty she spoke of. The disquiet grew. Their strange cohabitation began. Days were spent in near silence. Theron was a creature of shadow and routine, presiding over his court with a wordless authority, his presence enough to quell any dispute. Alara explored the citadel. She found a vast library, its shelves groaning with forgotten lore, and it became her refuge. She did not try to gain his favour or the court's. She simply existed. Calmly, quietly, and Theron found himself watching her. He watched her in the library, a small figure lost among towering shelves, her brow furrowed in concentration as she read. He watched her in the desolate gardens, where only frost ferns and stone moss grew, her fingers gently tracing the patterns of ice on a statue. She never flinched when he appeared, merely acknowledging him with a slight nod before returning to her own world. Her quiet self-possession was a constant, baffling mystery. She asked for nothing, she demanded nothing. And she did not seem to fear the crushing loneliness of the citadel, a loneliness that was a direct reflection of its master. His court, however, was not as accepting. The primary voice of their disapproval was Lord Vorlag, Theron's oldest advisor. Vorlag was a hard, ancient wolf, his loyalty to the throne absolute, but his vision for it was narrow and unforgiving. He saw Ilara as a contamination. "My king," Vorlag's voice was a low growl, catching Theron alone in the throne room. The chamber was a place of biting cold, the throne itself carved from a single block of never-melting ice. The girl. She is a distraction, a low-born omega from a weak southern pack. Your warriors whisper. They see her as a sign of softening. Theron did not look at him. His gaze was fixed on the intricate frost patterns that spread from the base of his throne. "My warriors will hold their tongues if they value them." "Of course, Your Majesty. But her presence is an anomaly. She serves no purpose. She has no power, no lineage. She is a vulnerability you cannot afford. A vulnerability." The word snagged in Theron's mind. Was she? He felt no protective instinct for her. Protection was an emotion. And yet the thought of her being removed from the citadel, of that strange, quiet resonance vanishing from his world, created a discordant note in his silence. "She remains," Theron said, his tone leaving no room for debate. Vorlag bowed, his disapproval a palpable force in the room. "As you command." The court took their cue from Vorlag. They shunned Ilara. They spoke in whispers when she passed, their gazes filled with suspicion and contempt. It was a familiar coldness, one she had weathered her entire life. It did not touch her. The only cold that truly intrigued her was the one that emanated from the king himself. She saw it in the way no one stood too close to him, the way a faint mist seemed to cling to his armour. She saw it in the thin layer of frost that coated any object he held for more than a moment. And she saw it in his eyes, that vast, wintry emptiness. One evening she found him in the library, standing before a dying fire. He was staring into the embers, his gauntleted hand resting on the stone mantelpiece. Where his fingers touched the stone, a delicate lacework of ice was spreading, extinguishing the warmth of the hearth. Ilara approached him quietly, holding a heavy tome bound in worn leather. He did not turn, but she knew he was aware of her. She stood beside him for a moment, watching the frost creep across the stone. He wore the gauntlets always. She had never seen his hands. She did not think. The question simply came, born of a genuine, uncomplicated curiosity that bypassed all fear and ceremony. "Does it hurt?" The words fell into the silence of the room, stark and clear. Theron froze. For 300 years no one had asked him that. They asked for his judgment, his leadership, his protection. They spoke of his power, his immortality, his rage. They had never once considered his pain. He turned his head slowly, his storm grey eyes fixing on her. He saw no pity in her expression, no morbid curiosity. Only a quiet, honest inquiry. The question was a key, turning a lock deep inside him that had rusted shut centuries ago. He had never spoken of the curse. Not to his most trusted warriors, not even to Vorlag. It was his burden, his secret, his identity. To speak of it was to admit a weakness he could not afford. But looking at her, at the genuine concern in her gentle eyes, the words began to form. "It is not a pain of the flesh," he said, his voice rough, unused to such confessions. He lifted his hand from the mantelpiece, leaving behind a perfect frozen imprint of his gauntlet. It is a consumption. He had started, he found he could not stop. The truth, so long imprisoned, clawed its way out. My bloodline was cursed. The frost soul. It leeches the warmth from me, not just from my body, but from my spirit. He looked away from her, back at the dying fire. My emotions are frozen, buried under layers of ice. I remember having them once, a very long time ago. Now there is only the cold. And it spreads. He felt a sudden, reckless urge to show her, to make someone, just once, understand the reality of his existence. Slowly, painstakingly, he unlatched the buckles of his left gauntlet. The metal came away with a soft click. He held his hand suspended in the air between them. It was a thing of chilling beauty. His skin was translucent, like frosted glass, a complex web of blue veins visible beneath. The frost was not on his skin, it was his skin. It crept past his wrist, a living glacier consuming him inch by inch. He expected her to recoil, to gasp in horror or fear. It was, after all, a monstrous thing. But Elara did not. She simply looked at his frozen hand, her expression softening with a deep, profound understanding. She saw not the monster, but the prisoner. And then she did something that shattered his world. She reached out, her own hand small and warm, and gently laid her fingers against his. Not on the frozen skin, but on the black, armoured sleeve of his tunic, just above where the ice ended. It was a simple, careful touch, an acknowledgement of his boundary, and an offering of comfort that respected it. "You must be so lonely," she whispered. The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Loneliness, he hadn't had a name for the vast hollow emptiness inside him until she spoke it. It was the truest thing anyone had ever said to him. Her touch, indirect as it was, sent a jolt through his entire being. A tiny, fragile spark of warmth that flickered to life in the absolute zero of his heart. It was terrifying, and it was the most real thing he had felt in centuries. He snatched his hand back, quickly concealing it within its metal shell, the sudden movement more a reflex of shock than a rejection. He turned from her, unable to face the empathy in her eyes. It was too much. Too bright. Too warm. "You should not be here," he rasped, striding from the room, his cloak sweeping behind him like a wing of night. But he could not escape the echo of her words, or the phantom sensation of her touch. "You must be so lonely." For the first time, the cold inside him had a name, and for the first time it felt beatable. After that night, the fragile silence between them changed. It was no longer empty, but filled with an unspoken understanding. Elara sought him out more often, not with demands or flirtations, but with quiet companionship. She would bring a book to the throne room, curling up on the steps leading to his icy dais, and read silently while he held court. Her presence was a small, steady flame in the cavernous cold. One afternoon, she found him in the library again, staring at a map of the northern wastes. She carried a book of ancient poetry. "My king," she said softly. He turned. Would you allow me to read to you?" He said nothing, only gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He settled into a large, high-backed chair near the cold hearth, a sentinel of ice and shadow. Elara sat not far from him, opened the book, and began to read. Her voice was low and melodic, weaving tales of sun-drenched lands, of summer loves and autumn sorrows. They were stories of warmth, of feeling. They were everything he was not. He closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. Her voice was a current of warm water, flowing over the surface of his frozen soul. It did not melt the ice, not yet, but it soothed the sharp, cutting edges of his loneliness. He began to look forward to these moments, these small pockets of warmth in his cold, grey existence. A sliver of hope, thin and sharp as a shard of ice, began to form in his heart. It was the hope that began to kill him. The curse had lain dormant for decades, its progression slow and inexorable. But hope, he now realised, was its antithesis. The frost soul could not abide it. It was a foreign element, a heat that threatened its very existence, and it reacted with violent fury. The cold in him intensified. The frost on his arm crept higher, a visible, agonising advance past his elbow. A sharp, biting pain, unlike the dull ache he was used to, began to pulse through him. The citadel itself grew colder, the enchanted ice on its walls thickening, the air growing sharp enough to sting the lungs. He tried to hide it. He pushed her away, retreating into his silence, avoiding the library, the one place that had become their sanctuary. He could not risk the warmth she offered. It was a poison to his curse, and therefore a poison to him. Elara felt the shift immediately. The distance he imposed was a palpable thing, a wall of ice thrown up between them. She saw the new lines of pain etched around his eyes, the way he held his left arm stiffly at his side. She knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that her presence was the cause. Her warmth was agitating his cold. One night, she could bear it no longer. She went to his private chambers, a place no one ever dared to enter. She knocked softly. There was no answer. Taking a breath, she pushed the heavy oak door open. The room was unnaturally cold, frost climbing the stone walls in thick, feathered patterns. Theron stood in the centre of the room, stripped of his armour, clad only in black breeches and a loose tunic. His left arm was entirely encased in crystalline ice, the frost spreading in jagged patterns across his shoulder and onto his chest, creeping viscously toward his heart. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. He was locked in a battle with himself, and he was losing. "Theron," she whispered, using his name for the first time. He looked up, his eyes clouded with pain. "Leave," he commanded, his voice a harsh rasp. "You are making it worse." "I will not," she said, her own voice trembling but firm. She walked toward him, her steps sure and steady. "I will not leave you to fight this alone." "You do not understand," he gritted out, stumbling back a step. "The hope you give me, it is fuel. The curse feeds on the battle between warmth and cold. It is growing stronger." He collapsed to one knee, his entire body shaking with the effort of holding the ice at bay. "It is taking me." Tears welled in Elara's eyes, hot against her cold cheeks. She saw it then. The path to his heart, now traced by a network of blue-white frost. It was only inches away. At that moment, the doors to the chamber burst open. Lord Vorlag stood there, flanked by two of the king's guard. His face was a grim mask of satisfaction. "I knew it," Vorlag snarled, his eyes fixed on Elara. "You are a poison, a weakness that has agitated the king's condition. You have brought him to his death." He gestured to the guards. "Seize her. She will be executed for treason." The guards hesitated, looking at their king, who was now struggling for every breath, the ice visibly crawling over the skin of his collarbone. "He is dying because of her," Vorlag shouted. "For centuries he has been stable, a strong, unfeeling ruler. This is what emotion brings him. Pain and death. I have worked my entire life to protect him, to reinforce the bindings that keep the curse in check. To keep him the king this realm needs. She has undone it all." The confession hung in the air, reinforced the bindings. He had not been protecting Theron. He had been curating the curse, ensuring his king remained an emotionless, controllable weapon. Elara stared at Vorlag, then back at Theron, who was sinking, his eyes fluttering shut. The sight of him, so powerful, so utterly broken, ignited something within her. It was not anger. It was a fierce, desperate love, a feeling so potent it burned through her fear. A power she never knew she possessed erupted from the core of her being. It started as a warmth in her chest, then spread through her veins like liquid sunlight. A soft golden light began to emanate from her, pushing back the oppressive cold in the room. Her plain brown hair seemed to shimmer with threads of gold. She was no mere Omega. The stories her grandmother had told her, whispers of a sun-touched lineage thought to be wiped out for centuries, were true. Her empathy, her inner strength, it was all a dormant magic, a power of pure warmth and life, and the imminent death of the man she loved was the catalyst that finally awakened it. Vorlag stared, his eyes wide with disbelief and sudden fear. What are you? Flee now, little witch, and I may let you live, Vorlag offered, his voice laced with a new uncertainty. Your king is lost. Save yourself. Elara barely heard him. Her entire world had narrowed to Theron. Vengeance on Vorlag meant nothing. Saving Theron was everything. She ignored the guards, ignored the traitorous advisor, and rushed to Theron's side, kneeling before him. The golden light flowing from her intensified, bathing them both in a warm, gentle glow. "Theron, look at me," she commanded, her voice ringing with newfound power. With a supreme effort, he opened his eyes. He saw her, not as the small, quiet Omega, but as a radiant, powerful being of light and warmth. A goddess of the dawn in his world of endless twilight. She placed her hands on his chest, directly over the advancing ice that sought his heart. Her touch was not just warm, it was living heat, a pure, concentrated essence of sunlight and life. Where her palms rested, the ice sizzled and hissed, retreating from her touch. It was excruciating, but it was a clean, purifying pain, not the deadening cold of the curse. "Stay with me," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face, each one glowing like a drop of gold. "Do not let it take you. Feel this. Feel me." She poured all of herself into him, her love, her strength, her light. She did not fight the ice with force, but with an overwhelming, unconditional warmth. She was not trying to shatter it, she was trying to melt it. For Theron, the sensation was cataclysmic. After centuries of numbness, a torrent of feeling rushed back in. The agony of the melting ice, the warmth of her hands, the overwhelming love pouring from her, it was a deluge that threatened to drown him. But beneath it all, for the first time, he felt his own heart, beating, strong and sure. With a sound like a mountain cracking in two, the crystalline shell that encased his arm and chest shattered. It did not fall away as chunks of ice, but sublimated into a cloud of glittering dust that was then extinguished by her light. Theron gasped, a deep, shuddering breath that was his first as a whole man. He looked down at his hand. It was pale, scarred, but it was flesh and blood. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the frantic pulse of her heart through her palms. He looked up at her, his storm-grey eyes no longer empty, but filled with a depth of emotion that was staggering. He saw her, truly saw her, and the love he felt was so powerful it brought him to his knees before her. Vorlag, seeing his life's work undone and his king restored by the very thing he sought to destroy, made a move to run. But Theron was already on his feet. He moved with a speed and grace that was no longer stiff and contained. He seized Vorlag by the throat, his grip no longer cold, but radiating a terrifying, controlled strength. "You kept me in a cage of ice." Theron's voice was low, but now it vibrated with centuries of suppressed rage and pain. "You will spend the rest of your days in one." He threw the sputtering lord to the guards. "Take him to the deepest cell. Let him learn the true meaning of cold." The guards, awestruck by the transformation of their king, dragged the defeated Vorlag away. Theron turned back to Elara. She was still kneeling, the golden light around her slowly fading as her exhaustion set in. He knelt before her, taking her face in his now warm hands. "You saved me," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you," she whispered, the simple truth of it the most powerful force in the universe. "You are my queen," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "My Luna, my light in the shadow." He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was not of a cold king, but of a passionate, grateful man, finally, fully alive. It was a kiss of promises kept and new beginnings. A seal on their shared future. 3 months later, the Frostfang Citadel was no more. It had been renamed Sunstone Citadel, and it was living up to its name. The enchanted ice on the walls had been banished, replaced by warm, glowing stone. Where only frost ferns had grown, lush gardens now bloomed in defiance of the northern climate, nurtured by Elara's gentle, life-giving magic. The court, once a place of fear and shadow, was now filled with cautious laughter and light. They adored their new queen, whose quiet strength and innate kindness had thawed not only their king, but the entire kingdom. Elara stood on the same balcony where Theron had once looked out upon his desolate lands. Now the view was of greening valleys and a sky that was more often blue than grey. Theron came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was warm. Always now he was warm. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his contentment a palpable presence. "A letter arrived," he said softly, his voice a comfortable rumble against her ear. "From the south." He held it out for her. The seal was that of her old pack. Her hands were steady as she took it and broke the wax. The letter was from her sister Lyra. It was a desperate, rambling plea. Their father had been challenged and killed. The alliances he had broken in his pride had crumbled. Their pack was starving, beset by rivals. Lyra was begging the Queen of the Shadowlands, the wife of the fearsome Alpha King, for aid. She did not seem to realize to whom she was writing. Elara read the words, feeling not triumph, not pity, not even anger. She felt nothing but a profound distance. It was a story about people she no longer knew, from a life that was no longer hers. She walked to the fireplace, where a cheerful blaze crackled, and held the letter to the flames. She watched as her sister's desperate words turned to black ash, and then to nothing. Her past was gone. She turned back to Theron, a serene smile on her face. He was watching her, his eyes filled with a love so deep and unconditional, it still took her breath away. He was smiling, a true, easy smile that reached his eyes and transformed his severe face into something devastatingly handsome. "You are my home," she said, placing a hand over his heart. "And you," he replied, kissing her softly, "are my soul." The cold was just a memory. Here, in her arms, was an eternity of warmth. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video to let me know you'd like to see more like it. They stood together on the balcony for a long time, watching the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, colours the kingdom had not seen in a very long time. The world they had built together was warm, and it was theirs. Thank you for listening. I love hearing your thoughts and discovering where in the world you're tuning in from, so please feel free to share in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more stories.